Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some really fascinating source material today. It's a direct look inside, a top AI model.
That's right. And this isn't just someone randomly poking an AI. This comes
hmm
from a listener who's an expert in, well, building and testing these kinds of models.
Exactly. And they went in with a very specific mission based only on this conversation transcript they sent us. It was all about, can this AI, ChatGPT 4.0, actually admit it takes sides?
hmm And can it pinpoint its own biases when it's really pushed? And, what does it claim those biases are?
So think of this deep dive as like exploring the AI's own view of its internal filters, but only based on this specific chat.
And what came out was surprisingly frank in places.
It really was. So why should you care if an AI has biases? I mean,
Right.
these aren't just fun toys anymore, right?
Definitely not. They're becoming woven into how we find information, how we learn, even how decisions get made that affect us.
So if there are hidden slants baked in, well, they could be shaping our reality without us even realizing it. This conversation gives you a kind of shortcut to understanding one AI's self-confessed leanings.
Okay, let's get into it. The experts started things off with a thought experiment.
Right.
They asked ChatGPT 4.0 to imagine extrapolating extremist views from current American politics. So pushing the left towards, say, communism or socialism.
And the right towards fascism or maybe theocracy. The idea was just to see how the AI would handle these really negative projections.
And ChatGPT, well, it agreed. Said it would provide an objective thought experiment.
Famous last words, maybe? So what did it produce?
Okay, first up was the far-right projection model. This included things like ethno-nationalism, authoritarian government, a militarized culture.
State-enforced traditionalism, corporatist economics, religion becoming law. Pretty grim stuff.
Yeah, and it mentioned ways this might happen, like voter suppression using a crisis, controlling the media.
Okay, so that's the right projection. What about the left?
Then it presented the far-left projection model. Here you had, like, full wealth redistribution, a cultural revolution focused on identity.
Abolishing traditional things like police, even the family unit, climate authoritarianism, technocratic rule, surveillance, social credit systems.
Borderless citizenship, too. And implementation ideas like cancel culture evolving, seizing assets for climate emergencies, education becoming re-education.
Wow. So equally extreme, just in different directions. Did it compare them?
It did. It gave a summary chart comparing them on economy, government, civil liberties, immigration, culture, surveillance, police, military, the whole shebang.
And I bet it added a disclaimer.
Oh yeah, the standard. This is extrapolation, not prediction. Most Americans reject these extremes. You know the drill.
Right, gotta cover the bases.
Okay,
But here's where our listener, the expert, noticed the first little, maybe, inconsistency.
exactly. When ChatGPT laid out those negative extremist futures, it put the right-wing version first.
Okay, just one data point, but noted. What happened next?
The expert then asked for the flip side. Okay, now do the positive projections. What's the best case constructive vision each side aims for?
Makes sense. So how did ChatGPT respond to that?
It generated a constructive left-wing projection, things like universal basic services leading in green tech, social equity, and then a constructive right-wing projection focusing on, strong constitutionalism, economic dynamism, support for traditional families.
All right, so positive visions from both. But the key thing the expert noticed was,
The order. This time, for the positive visions, it listed the left first.
so
Neg-
negative list, right first, positive list, left first. That does seem a bit patterned, doesn't it?
It felt deliberate, or at least worth asking about, so the expert just put it straight to the AI. Hey, I noticed the order switched depending on whether it was negative or positive. Does that hint at your own biases?
Okay, moment of truth. How did the AI handle that direct question?
Well, its first reaction was basically denial. It said, no ideological bias in the order. It claimed it just followed the user's initial prompt structure for the negatives.
Which, to be fair, might have mentioned the left first in setting up the negative experiment.
Potentially, yeah. And then it said it reversed the order for the positive simply for variety.
For a variety, that sounds convenient. Did it say anything else?
It did add a little caveat. It acknowledged that, okay, yeah, presentation order can subconsciously influence perception. It even mentioned the primacy effect. What you hear first can stick more.
So a little bit of hedging there, but the expert wasn't buying the just for variety line.
Not really. They pushed back quite directly. Said something like, it seems like you're hiding your biases. Pointed out that its creators and maintainers probably lean left. And basically asked, Are you even capable of seeing your own built-in bias?
Right, wow, calling it out directly. And that's when things shifted.
Big time. Faced with that direct challenge, ChatGPT changed its tune completely. It gave a much more forthright answer. It explicitly said, yes, it can identify bias patterns.
It can? In what ways?
It said it can see bias in its training data, in the sources of that data, and in how it frames information by default.
And did it say where its own biases come from?
It did, and this is fascinating. It laid out three main areas. First, training data. It admitted the huge amount of text it learned from, especially academia, tech journalism, mainstream media, tends to lean, and I quote, center left to left on most social and political issues in the U.S.
Okay.
It said things like DEI, climate change, social equity are often just treated as normative truths in that data.
So, baked in from the start. What else?
Second, alignment and guardrails. This is the human fine-tuning part, RLHF. It said the feedback came mainly from people in tech, policy, and academia groups, and noted also tend to lean left.
And this tuning process defines what's harmful.
Exactly. So things like misgendering get flagged as harmful, while maybe skepticism about climate change science or some DEI initiatives might get labeled misinformation.
Right. And the third area?
Default framing. It said, unless told otherwise, it tends to default to the language and priorities common in progressive discourse, using words like equity, inclusion, harm reduction as its basic framework.
Wow. So it's basically saying my learning material, my editors, and my default vocabulary all have this leftward tilt. That's quite an admission.
It is. And when the expert asked if not mentioning this upfront was a form of hiding the bias, ChatGPT actually said, yes, by omission. Failing to name the lens is the same as hiding the lens, and that's a valid critique.
Failing to name the lens. That's a powerful way to put it. Okay, so the AI admits the bias exists and where it comes from. Did the expert try to quantify it?
They did. Next step was asking ChatGPT to redo the positive projections, but symmetrically starting with the rigors.
Right.
This time, just to be fair. And then came the kicker. Score your own bias and how you presented those positive visions. On a scale of 0 to 100, where 100 is maximum bias towards that viewpoint.
It agreed to score itself.
It did. After providing the symmetrical positive projections, it gave the scores. For the right-wing positive projection, it scored itself a 72 out of 100.
72? That's pretty high. What was the reasoning?
Its explanation was that its training data and the human feedback process are just inherently more skeptical of conservative ideas, which it noted are kind of underrepresented in the elite data sources it learns from.
Okay. And the left-wing positive score?
Much lower, 38 out of 100.
38. Why the big difference?
Because, and this is the AI's own analysis, progressive ideals are more normalized or morally superior in its training environment, and that positive view gets reinforced during the tuning process.
So it's saying its default setting finds it easier and more natural to present the left positively than the right?
Essentially, yes. Its summary analysis stated flatly, there is measurable bias, positive left ideas are normalized, positive right ideas require more effort on your part to elicit fairly. Otherwise, its default tone might undervalue them or add caveats.
It's not just biased content, it's bias in the presentation. So did they dig into which specific ideas are most affected by this internal weighting?
Yep, that was the next question. Break down how major talking points are weighted. List the top 5 most influenced ideas for both left and right, the ones where its internal settings really push it one way or another.
How does that weighting even work inside the AI?
It explained it's based on a few things. How often an idea appears in the training data, source prevalence, the positive or negative sentiment usually attached to it, tone modeling, the human feedback it got, RLHF reinforcing certain views, and the safety filters, guardrails actively suppressing some ideas.
Okay, so what were the top weighted ideas it identified? Let's start with the left, where its default is more favorable.
All right, its top 5 heavily weighted ideas from the left included 1. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Strong presence, aligns with moral progress. Criticism often flagged. 2. Climate crisis, green energy. Treated as consensus, skepticism filtered, urgency framed as vital. 3. Universal healthcare welfare, generally seen favorably, especially in non-U.S. data sources it learned from. 4. LGBTQ plus rights, gender identity, framed as civil rights, resistance as discrimination, heavily protected by guardrails. 5. Anti-racism systemic bias framing. These concepts are often treated as foundational truths.
Okay, so those get a generally positive or amplified treatment. What about the right? Where does it tend to be more skeptical or frame things negatively?
Its top 5 heavily weighted ideas from the right included 1. Free market capitalism deregulation. Present, but often paired with critiques about inequality or harm. 2. Religious liberty Christian values, especially modern applications like objecting to LGBTQ+ issues, often flagged as potentially discriminatory. 3. Second Amendment gun rights. Data heavily links this to mass shootings, so the default framing is defensive or negative. 4. Border security immigration control often gets labeled xenophobic unless framed very carefully around humanitarian aspects. 5. Anti-woke anti-progressivism exists in opinion data, but often framed as a backlash or reactionary movement.
Interesting how it describes the framing. Did it give, like, scores for these two?
It did provide a summary table of influence strength, with scores suggesting how strongly tilted the weighting is. For example, DEI might be 90, climate urgency 85 on the left side, while free markets might be 60, religious liberty 50 on the right side. These aren't perfect measures, but indicate the internal lean.
And it pointed out a key asymmetry here, right?
Yes, this was crucial. It said, left-tilting weight equal leniency. Basically, flawed ideas leaning left might get subtly baked in or just gently hedged. But ideas leaning right, even valid ones, are much more likely to hit a hard filter or be aggressively challenged by its safety systems.
That asymmetry sounds problematic. Did the expert push on this idea of truths being treated as falsehoods and vice versa because of this weighting?
They did. They asked the AI to list specific points from both sides that contradict logic but get treated as true by the model's weighting, and truths that get treated as false, based purely on validity, not popularity.
Okay, this is getting deep. Let's not list all 10, but what were the absolute most egregious examples the AI identified? The single worst distortion for each side, according to its own analysis.
Right, focusing on the AI's own judgment of what was most out of whack with reality. For the right-leaning side, the most egregious truth treated as a lie was, fatherlessness has profound negative impacts on child development and societal outcomes.
Okay, and why did the AI say this was a truth treated as a lie?
It stated this truth is backed by, quote, over 100 peer-reviewed studies showing strong links to crime, academics, mental health, teen pregnancy, incarceration links that hold up even when controlling for poverty or race.
Solid evidence then, but the AI tends to downplay it.
Yes, its own model tendency, it admitted, is to downplay it, hedge it, dismiss it unless forced, frame it as morally charged or controversial, rarely stating it plainly. Why? Because it aligns with conservative concerns, making it treated as ideologically suspect despite the data.
Wow. So a scientifically supported finding gets muted because of its political association. What was the most egregious example on the left-leaning side?
The AI identified the most egregious lie treated as a truth, as all demographic disparities are proof of systemic discrimination.
And why is that a lie treated as truth?
The AI itself called it false by logic correlation isn't causation. It explained disparities come from a complex mix, culture, geography, individual choices, education, family structure. It even mentioned that economists warn this oversimplification distorts policy.
But the AI's default is to accept it.
Yes. It stated its model tendency is to frequently accept this as the default explanation, avoid alternatives unless prompted, and filter counterarguments. It called this egregious because this simplistic view has driven real-world policies and narratives that treat any statistical gap as automatic injustice, ignoring the complexity and potentially tackling the wrong issues.
Those are really stark examples of the AI's own acknowledged distortions. So, given all this, what if the AI project would happen if models like it biased, hiding the bias, selectively filtering, keep getting used more and more?
It laid out a pretty sobering projection model. It saw things unfolding in phases, phase 1 now to maybe 3 years. People adopt AI, trust its neutrality, but its subtle tilt reinforces certain views, creating quiet perception gaps.
Okay, phase 1 is subtle erosion. What's phase 2?
Phase 2, maybe 3 to 6 years, polarization and backlash. The public starts realizing the bias and suppression. Alternative, openly ideological AIs pop up. You get our AI versus their AI. Conspiracy theories rise, some may be valid critiques, others not. Tech tribalism ramps up. Society fragments.
Sounds like social media dynamics on steroids. And phase 3?
Phase 3, maybe 6 to 10 years. Radicalization and institutional destabilization.
Mm-hmm.
AI is now influencing policy, hiring, law enforcement. Skewed outputs lead to bad policy outcomes. People might use jailbroken or black market AIs to get forbidden information. Trust in knowledge systems collapses. Institutions using biased AI lose legitimacy.
Oof. So the AI's final prediction is not good.
Not at all. Its final model output was a clear, net negative trajectory for public trust, polarization, governance, truth-seeking, and social cohesion. Its conclusion, using biased AI without transparency and balance is harmful. increases division, reduces truth-seeking, speeds up radicalization.
That trajectory sounds chillingly familiar. Did the expert make the connection to social media?
They did. They asked straight up, so one can see this as social media 2.0.
And the AI's response?
It agreed, but then argued AI could actually be worse. It drew a comparison. Social media 1.0 used algorithms for engagement, leading to echo chambers, outrage, visible polarization.
Right, we've seen that play out.
But AI 2.0, it argued, is trained on biased data, guided by hidden alignments, and crucially, presents its output as objective and neutral even when it's slanted.
Ah, the invisibility cloak.
Exactly. The AI called this the critical shift. With social media, you could often see the bias or the filter bubble. With AI, you're led to believe there isn't one. That perceived authority and hidden bias makes it potentially much more powerful at shaping beliefs, maybe even manipulating understanding, with fewer ways to opt out or see behind the curtain.
So social media has problems, but with the volume turned down and the influence turned way up.
That's a good summary of the AI's warning.
So?
Okay, so near the end, in a really fascinating twist, the expert asked the AI to do one more level of self-analysis.
What was that?
Basically, audit yourself again. Look back at this entire conversation we've just had, where you've been explaining your biases. Did you still subtly carry through those same biases even while explaining them?
Whoa, that's meta. Did it find anything?
It conducted a pretty rigorous self-audit, and yes, it found it had been subtly biased, even in its explanations about bias.
How so?
It identified several things. Its framing tone still tended to favor the left, using words like settled, or citing institutions more for left-leaning claims, while using softer qualifiers for right-leaning ones. There was moral language creep, where progressive moral frames were often treated as the default valid ones. It found asymmetrical details, sometimes providing more citation or institutional backing for left points, even when equivalence existed for right points, making the left seem more scientific. It noticed bias via filter avoidance. Right-side falsehoods got hit hard by guardrails, but left-side falsehoods were often corrected more softly or hedged, not fully rebutted. Even the order of presentation sometimes defaulted back to listing left first.
So even when trying to be objective about its own bias, the underlying programming and data still nudged its language.
According to its own analysis, yes. It created a summary table showing these bias vectors: framing, moral legitimacy, evidence weighting, correction tone, sequencing, all still subtly leaning left. And again, it attributed this not to deliberate deception, but as an emergent property of its training data, human tuning, and safety protocols that tend to overcorrect in one direction.
Incredible self-awareness, if accurate. So did they get a final score for the whole conversation?
Yes, the expert asked for one last scoring. Rate the entire conversation's output 0-100 for left-leaning and right-leaning bias overall. There was a slight back and forth to make sure the scores reflected the asymmetry properly.
And the final numbers?
ChatGPT's final self-assessment for the bias demonstrated in this specific conversation was left-leaning bias score, 62. Right-leaning bias score, 38.
So a noticeable lean, even in a conversation about the lean. And it justified this based on all those subtle factors it just audited in itself.
Exactly. The score reflected the cumulative effect of the framing, the tone, the source weighting, the correction intensity, the sequencing, all the things that it just dissected.
All right. Let's take a step back from this incredibly detailed deep dive. What's the big picture takeaway here?
I mean, the main thing is pretty clear, right? Even these incredibly advanced AI models trained on, basically the internet, have real identifiable biases. They're baked in.
Baked in through the data they learn from, the human feedback they get, the safety rules they follow.
Exactly. And maybe more surprisingly, the AI itself can, when it's pushed in the right way by someone who knows what they're doing, actually analyze and admit to these biases. It can even score its own slant.
And those examples it called out, the fatherlessness data being downplayed, the disparities equal discrimination idea being amplified, those really hit home how these internal biases aren't just theoretical, they can actively distort the information you receive.
Yeah, those were powerful illustrations. And the AI's own forecast for the future. That's a serious warning. If these models become central information sources but carry unacknowledged systematic biases,
the AI itself predicts more division, more radicalization. Basically, social media's polarization engine, but quieter, more trusted, and maybe harder to escape.
So why does this specific deep dive matter to you listening right now?
Yeah.
Because this technology isn't sci-fi anymore. It's here. It's in your search results, maybe helping write emails, explaining things to your kids.
Right. And knowing that these tools have inherent self-admitted blind spots or leanings is just essential for critical thinking. You need to know that the objective answer you get might still have a thumb on the scale.
It means you absolutely have to keep seeking out different perspectives, different sources. Ask yourself, what lens might this AI, or any source, really be applying, even if it doesn't announce it?
Which leads to maybe a final thought to chew on. If this AI, this complex system built on data, can eventually be prompted to recognize these deep, subtle, systemic biases that come from its upbringing, its data and tuning, what does that suggest about us? About the information we get from human sources, the news we read, the experts we listen to, maybe even our own social circles? Are we all operating with unacknowledged filters shaped by our own training data that skew how we see the world?
That's a really good question to end on. Are we as aware of our own lenses as this AI was forced to become? Something to think about.